Hi everyone and welcome to today's GG+A webinar on the GivingUSA 2014 report. I'm Lana Buseman from the marketing team here at GG+A and we're very excited for you to join us. Before we begin today, I just want to go over some technical details. We ask that if you can, please log into WebEx before dialing in. Once you launch the webinar, a window will appear on your screen similar to what you see on slide 1. If you've already called in, please hang up and follow the instructions in the window to dial in. Then we will be able to associate your phone with your name. Next, we may ask some yes or no questions during the session. Please look at the slide on the screen to see where you can answer yes or no. During the session, your phone will be muted. If you want to ask Lori and Suzanne a question directly, we encourage you to use the chat panel shown on slide 3 in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Please notice that we ask you to direct your question to all panelists so the presenters and I can see it and field it. At the end of today's session, we are going to ask everyone to take a 1-minute survey to let us know what you thought of the webinar, so please stick around for that. If at any point during the webinar you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please send me an email at lbuseman@grensglier.com or call our meeting provider WebEx directly at 866-229-3239. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lori.
Thanks, Lana. This is Lori Musgrove, Senior Vice President, Managing Director at Glier & Associate, and today I'm going to be joined by Suzanne Hilzer-Wiles, Vice President of the firm, and we're happy to talk to you today about the results of the 2013 GivingUSA results. Just as a reminder, this GivingUSA is the oldest annual report on charitable giving in the United States. It's published by the USA Foundation, the GivingUSA Foundation, and it reflects giving by Americans to American institutions. And I want to recognize our colleague Donna Wiley, who has been a part of the editorial review board for GivingUSA for many years. It's also important to remember that these numbers are estimates based on tax data and survey results across sectors and institutions. So we're going to get started with reviewing some of the data, and I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're first going to look at the slide that is 2013 contributions by source of contributions. Last year, you see over $335 billion was given to charitable institutions in the United States by Americans. And most notably, you see the giant piece of the pie, individual giving. That is up $9.69 billion from the year before. As a percentage of overall giving in the U.S., we've seen the individual piece of the pie shrink a little over recent years, but it's important to note that within foundations, family foundations comprise about 50% of that. So when you consider family foundations bequest gifts directly from individuals, this is still an extraordinarily large part of giving here in the United States.
And let me add to Suzanne's comments that of the 4 sources reflected here in this chart, only corporate giving declined in 2013. And we believe that is a direct result of the fact that pre-tax profits also declined in 2013, of course, reducing how corporations want to allocate its, a corporation allocates its charitable contributions.
Now we're going to review the giving by sector, by type of organization. And I'm going to spend a few minutes just reminding people what some of these definitions are because they're not all incredibly clear, and then Lori's going to talk to us about what the data means. First of all, it's important to note that academic healthcare institutions fall within education and not healthcare. Obviously, that a lot of giving goes to academic healthcare in the United States, but these are actually, those gifts are by type of parent institutions, so universities. International affairs includes American-based institutions that serve international causes. Again, gifts directly to international organizations wouldn't be counted here. Unallocated are gifts to public entities like gifts to public schools, firehouses, libraries, and the public sector is disaster relief and donor advised funds. Those are smaller sectors here, certainly, but it's important to remember what falls where.
And what we see in the data, the comparative data between 2013 and 2012, is that of these 10 types of recipient organizations, all but 3 actually saw increases in gifts to their organizations. The 3 that recorded declines or remained flat in one case, gifts to international affairs declined almost 7% year over year. Gifts to foundations were down about 15.5%, and gifts to religion remained flat. And this is a function of the fact that fewer people are attending churches and fewer are members of churches. And we're going to talk in a minute about the longer-term implications of that. It is noteworthy for many of you on the phone today that education recorded its highest level of gifts in the 40 years that Giving USA has been keeping track of this data. Education giving has rebounded significantly since the recession, the Great Recession of 2007-8. The next slide, we're looking at total giving by year over that 40-year period. You'll see again that in 2013, Giving USA is reflecting slightly more than $335 billion contributed overall by Americans to American institutions. This is the highest amount since the recession and is some $14–15 billion less than the adjusted, inflation-adjusted dollars recorded, which was just under $350 billion. One of the drivers of this is the growth in mega gifts, which Giving USA defines as $80 million or higher. In 2012, such gifts totaled $1.5 billion, and in 2013, that number grew to $4.2 billion. And so we can see that's very encouraging, obviously, to our institutions. At the same time, we have seen a decline in gifts of $1 million to our organizations, and we believe that's somewhat of a reflection of consumer confidence, but we're not yet sure exactly what the dynamic is at this point behind that.
So one of the things that is tracked carefully, of course, is gifts from high net worth individuals, and this may be another factor that Lori was just alluding to. So high net worth individuals are defined as people who have an overall annual household income of $200,000 or more, or assets greater than $1 million, excluding their primary residence. This can account for up to 50% of individual giving in any given year, or an average of about 50%. The last year for which this information is available is 2011, and 26% of gifts from individuals came from this group. That can also impact those $1 million gifts. So now we're going to take a moment to talk about bequests. Obviously, we're not going through every slide in this deck. We're happy to answer questions or have conversation about any of them. But this is one that stood out to us for a few reasons. First of all, the percentage of estates that include gifts to charitable organizations has been fairly steady at about 5%. And we know that from our clients that a lot of you have made efforts over the year to raise the visibility of planned giving at your institutions. And we do see this as a real opportunity for growth. The U.S. Census estimated in 2012 that 13.7% of the U.S. population was 65 or older. With the baby boomers continuing to age, we know that that's going to be a very large part of our population ongoing. Another thing that came out of the Women Give 2012 study that was also done by the Lilly Foundation Center for Philanthropy is that boomer and older women are more likely to give to charity and more likely to give larger gifts than men when we actually take into account the other factors that affect giving. Women are concerned about living longer, so they tend to be a little bit more conservative, but they want to give. So when we think about this group, we would encourage you all to look at what might be a good strategy for getting more of them to make planned gifts. They seem like a very good market for you all, and maybe that haven't been singled out in particular.
And we might also, as this transfer of wealth that all of us have heard about the last two decades or so, that as this continues to accelerate, will it move the needle in terms of the amount of gift revenue that flows to our organizations as a percentage of total contributions? Gifts from bequests have averaged 7 to 9%, and we wonder if, and that's been over the 40-year period, so we are interested in keeping an eye on what that trend may develop.
One more thing that I would point out, we had some discussion about this in preparation for our call, that oftentimes planned giving is part of the major gift strategy. So one of the things that we would encourage you all to look at, really using your data to figure out who might be a planned giving prospect that is actually different from a major gift prospect. We do think there's opportunity for growth there. We did get a question now about the data about mega gifts. Somebody has asked that Lori share that again because it is noteworthy. So Lori's going to recap that for you.
So 2013, gifts of $80 million, verifiable as gifts made in 2013, amounted to $4.2 billion, which was a significant increase over those types of gifts in 2012. The 12 numbers totaled $1.5 billion. So $1.5 billion in 2012, $4.2 billion in 2013.
And one of the other incredibly interesting things that we didn't note earlier is that the top 10 of those gifts actually comprised $3 billion of that. So that difference is actually 10 gifts. So now we're going to take a quick look at corporate giving because it did decrease last year. It is important to note that about half of this number annually comes from in-kind gifts, so gifts to food banks, gifts from pharmaceutical companies, and equipment, that sort of thing. So this is not all cash, although we do think the cash portion of it is what's driving that trend downward.
Right, correct. And as I noted earlier that corporate giving did decline year over year from 12 to 13. Just simply as a reminder that while corporate giving can be very significant and very meaningful to our institutions, particularly those in higher education who may use pieces of equipment or software, et cetera, that are given to us, it does amount to only about 5% of the dollars that flow into our organizations overall. So keeping a close eye on trends is important, and indeed, corporate giving may represent a greater portion of your philanthropic income, and so it would vary institution to institution and type of organization to organization.
Now we're going to take a look at giving as a percentage of GDP. So before we move on, we did get a question about whether or not corporate giving includes sponsorship to nonprofits, sponsorship dollars, and that depends institution by institution. It's really how you define corporate philanthropy. In fact, we were just involved in a review of a corporate and foundations relations program for one of our clients, and this makes it difficult to compare these programs apples to apples because sponsorship is handled slightly differently at different institutions.
And that's true, and it really goes to how you define a sponsorship, whether it's a deliverable and would fall closer into a marketing bucket than into something that resembles more closely philanthropic support. So don't have a clear answer for you on this, but it is an important question that may have implications for your programs long term. So can't be a great deal of help to you in providing the definitive answer. It's one of those gray areas that we have not done a good job clarifying over time. Just very briefly, the slide that you're looking at right now is an indicator really of consumer confidence. As you can see, it again peaked early in the 2000s when we were all enjoying sort of the heyday of the stock market and rising home prices, et cetera, and took, again, that significant dip after the Great Recession. However, it is somewhat encouraging that it has rebounded to some degree. We also would encourage you to think about looking at trends in disposable income. Consumer confidence, disposable income are good indicators of philanthropic growth, philanthropic comfort, let's say, in providing gifts. We did see philanthropic growth, again, take a dip. In 2012, it was at about 1.9%, of course, which compares to 2.4% in 2000. So we're still not back to pre-recession levels in that regard, but again, some recovery has occurred. So I'm going to talk just very briefly, because so many of you are in education, about some of the growth and some of the changes we've seen over the last year. As you can see from the chart before you right now, education enjoyed philanthropic support totaling slightly more than $52 million. What we know is that at the higher educational level, public institutions fared somewhat better than privates. K through 12, private K through 12 also was strong in 2013. One of the data points that we were surprised to see is the very strong growth rate among alumni dollars, which increased by almost 17%, 16.9%, or $1.3 billion. And I'm sure many of you in higher education particularly may be scratching your heads right now, because you may be part of the continuing trend in the decline of alumni donors. And so this is, again, something that we all need to think about and understand, and again, maybe very well may be driven by some of those mega gifts that we talked about a few minutes ago. Gifts to education from foundations grew almost 10%, or $850 million. So overall, what this data appears to be telling us that our high-income donors appear to be returning to pre-recession patterns of giving, and it appears also that this is being driven by a return to capital campaigns, or large comprehensive campaigns, that our donors are moving back to more capital or endowment giving as compared to program support, current support that all of your institutions needed so much during the recessionary period.
We also see that trend play out when we look at the different sectors. So, for instance, arts and culture, which took a much harder hit during the recession, has rebounded very well in the last year or two. So people are not only giving types of gifts, but to types of organizations that more closely reflect what they were doing pre-recession. So if they were responding to immediate need, for instance, with food bank, they're going back to their local museum symphony orchestras post-recession. So this is good news for those sectors that have been particularly hard hit during the recession. And we have a few questions. We're going to open the floor to questions, so please do write in your questions, but Lori's going to read us the first one.
So we have a question that's come in that whether or not this is a good time for a campaign, and should we be optimistic about launching campaigns of this period. And so I'm going to ask Suzanne to respond to that.
So this is the question we often get. How important is the economy to our plans? And I would say this is a question that board members and particularly ask. And we would tell you that the economy as a whole is less important than your readiness. impact is very important to our donors, and your ability to tell the story of why you should be among their top priorities, why there is a sense of urgency, and what you're going to do with those gifts is much more important than, I would say, the economy as a whole. The good news is the economy is recovering. We see that it's reflected in people's giving, but there is no less need, I would say, to be able to tell your story in a clear, compelling, and urgent way. That is true no matter what is happening in the economy.
And what we saw among our clients, again, post-recession and through today, but particularly in those 2 or 3 years after the recessionary period, when we conducted feasibility studies to evaluate the external readiness of an institution's constituency to make gifts, we began to learn that most noted a concern about the economy and the impact it would have on the campaign, but then would very quickly counter with, but we have to do this. And the need to launch a campaign or a fundraising effort was often driven by the fact that endowments took a hit, other kinds of revenue streams took a hit, and so the institution, it was really even more important than ever that the institution rally its constituents to provide new levels of support even during pretty difficult times.
We have a question here about volunteerism. The volunteer rate doesn't seem to have bounced back post-recession. What are the implications for that for fundraising, Lori?
Well, I think we've seen we have seen this over the last 5 years, that volunteerism among our institutions has remained flat, has not, as Suzanne noted, or in the question, that has not returned to pre-recessionary levels. And this is a concern, certainly to GG+A and in our conversations with clients, that we have to redouble the effort to identify meaningful ways for our constituents, our friends, our donors, parents, patients, patrons, to participate in the life of the institution, to become knowledgeable advocates and donors. Of course, we hope there will always be donors, but it is an area of some concern that as we become older, as we become increasingly busy, that the availability of the time that individuals have to devote to our institutions is becoming an increasing challenge. And so we have to be very smart about what we are asking our donors to do, to under our volunteers, to really understand what is the need, and then to provide the appropriate support and, frankly, training to help them fulfill those needs in a way that is meaningful both for the individual volunteer but also the institution.
So we have another question here about consumer confidence. How much has the dip in consumer confidence affected gifts below $1 million versus gifts of over $1 million?
Well, this is a question that we were debating to some degree, and as a result of some data that we have just seen, which is somewhat of a concern at the $1 million level, that we have not only have we not seen a return to pre-recessionary times, but we actually are seeing a continued decline in this. And it, again,
gifts of over $1 million.
Gifts of $1 million. And so it's not clear to us at this point what is driving that. Is that institutional reluctance to ask for gifts, sort of a hangover of the recession? Is it tied to the dip in consumer confidence? We know that the wealth has increased dramatically since the recession, so is this a lagging indicator for the future? So I wish I had a better answer for you, but it is something that certainly suggests some additional research and conversation. Another question that's come in, are there trends in how people's giving post-recession that may be giving us useful signals as we plan for the future? And I'm going to ask Suzanne to respond.
I think there are two things that we hear often from donors that are maybe a reflection of choices that you all have had to make about your programs during recession years when some of you have had to cut some programs. And those are communications and stewardship. The need to show impact, understand impact, believe in impact is an ongoing emphasis for donors. We often talk about that with younger donors, but really that is true of donors across generations as we work with our clients. So the need to really communicate that thoroughly. The other piece of it is stewardship. We did a very interesting study with a university client not that long ago where the #1 concern that came out of those donor interviews was less about the university now. They were very enthusiastic about the president, the vision, his ability to rally the team to execute on that. But people did not understand what had happened to their large gifts to the last campaign. So if you have made choices along the way about cutting stewardship activities, stewardship staff, you should really think about that now. What are the implications going forward? That's an area that we believe you should be thinking about investing in, and that may be a sort of a leftover from choices made during those recession years.
So we have a question here about the impact of the mega gifts and big dollar campaigns on rank and file donors. I'm really interested in this topic because the focus and I won't say obsession because maybe that's too strong of a word, but the focus on securing the really big gifts, while undeniably important to our institutions, and in terms of driving philanthropic growth in this country, it can have a distracting, inadvertent impact on our programs. I have seen among my clients from time to time individual gift officers or leadership that is so focused on that mega gift. And again, mega gift can be defined in a variety of ways depending upon your institution and its needs. That we begin to lose sight of the absolutely critical work that has to be done in building the pipeline. And so if we are losing focus on, again, bringing in, whether they be alumni or patrons or ticket buyers, whoever they may be, bringing those new donors into our organization, helping them understand the mission and the direction, and we are not bringing them along over time through, you might call them entry-level gifts or test gifts, or bringing them in at initial levels and working with them to build their investment, they're both an emotional, intellectual, and financial investment, we are going to do harm to our organizations long-term. So we want to celebrate the mega gifts. We want to learn from our colleagues around the country who are succeeding in this regard, but we cannot lose focus on, again, preserving and growing the pipeline of other kinds of prospects.
And I would say there is often a concern at institutions that those gifts will actually suppress giving from smaller dollar donors who will think, oh, my gift isn't meaningful. That really goes back to how are you communicating about that gift. Generally, we think that we see across our clients that they help philanthropy overall at institutions. They raise the visibility of philanthropy. They show that these very sophisticated philanthropists believe that this is an organization that is worthy of investment, that the investment will be well used. But it is important that you develop a story that is authentic about how every gift counts. Just saying every gift counts doesn't matter. What do you do doesn't work. What are you doing with those gifts? How have those gifts changed the face of your institution? What else will you be able to accomplish by bringing in donors at the $100,000, $500,000, even $10,000 level?
And how are you stewarding those donors?
Exactly, and how are you stewarding them? And Lori made a really important point. I mean, we always talk about, you know, people give more than a dozen gifts on average before they give their first $1 million gift, but we see that. We interview donors all the time on behalf of our clients and ask them about, their first gift to an institution. Just a few weeks ago, I interviewed a woman who was very proud of her first gift, $100, to a cultural institution because she just loved their mission when she was a student. And during the course of this conversation, she let us know that she's going to give a $10 million gift. So these are real, and it is incredibly important that every person who gives that gift, $100 to her when she was a student, was incredibly meaningful. The institution did a good job of making her feel like it was meaningful to them as well.
And I think you're likely, many of you, if not all of you, read the article about Michael Bloomberg on the announcement of his $350 million gift to Johns Hopkins, that his first gift to the university was $5. And it was made after his graduation. So it goes to, you know, this question is a great question because it goes to so many aspects of our work and what we really need to be paying attention to.
And if we consider ourselves long-term stewards of these institutions, we should not be just concerned about how well we do compared to our current goals, but are we setting the institution up to do well for future generations, and this is an important part of that.
So we have a question about major gift programs and how long it will take for a new team to work with small donors who have been making smaller, more modest gifts until they are growing to, I think in this situation, our major gift level is $10,000. What I would advise or how I would answer that question is to say, typically our experience has been over time 18 to 24 months for a major gift. That, again, is that defined as $10,000 in your case, $50,000, $100,000, depending on the institution. The nature of how many staff you have and how much time they have to devote to working with major gift prospects. We have seen somewhat of a elongation, is that a word, to this time frame, which is a little bit, again, a little bit worrying in terms of the needs of our institutions. But I think if you're working on a goal of each prospect who is assigned to a major gift officer in a pool, that you would design a cultivation and solicitation timeline that would start at 18 months. Now, in my own career, I found donors who on the first visit were ready to make what we defined as a major gift, and other times it takes much longer. But what's important here is that you develop a plan for each prospect and that you attach real deadlines, real timelines to the work you're going to try to accomplish, and you stick to that timeline in a way that's both urgent, intensive, and communicates importance to the prospective donor.
And I would add to this, I think one of the common pitfalls we see with new major gifts programs, emerging major gifts programs, is the unwillingness to unassign people. So as you put together this plan and you've created some urgency, if the person isn't responsive, not responsive to you, it does not look like they are actually moving forward in a meaningful way, don't be afraid to move them out of the pool. You probably don't have enough staff to manage every person who actually looks like a prospect for you right now. And just because somebody looks like they should be a major donor to you all doesn't mean they will, as you know. And so I think putting in place a process that is regular and not attached to an individual name makes it easier to instill some rigor around that very important part of the program that is often left to languish. So you're trying to juggle 150 people, but if 50 of them really are not responsive to you, that's a lot of wasted time in your portfolio.
So,
we're reading your question, sorry.
You know, the question regarding the giving to education and whether or not it can be broken down between public and private institutions, I don't know the answer to that question, so perhaps we can get back to you privately about that. I just am not familiar enough with the Giving USA publication process, whether we can dissect that, but it's a great question, and we should try to answer it.
There's another question about ROI per fundraiser. How much should each major gift officer be raising relative to their salary, their FTE status? That is a very difficult one, and but it's one we hear all the time from university presidents. If I let them bring in or board members, right? If I let them hire 5 new major gifts officers, how much am I going to get the first year? We really try and help you in supporting the idea that it's not quite as cut and dry as that. There needs to be, because it's so dependent on your program. As Lori just said, a major gift might be $10,000, it might be $500,000. What we think you need to look at is what will this person's pool look like? And before you hire, to do a little work on that. What is the sector or segmentation constituency that they'll be working with that is not covered right now? How many people are in that pool? How mature are those? You know, we've had gifts officers join institutions and get a pool of prospects who are fully cultivated. They're taking over from somebody who left the institution. There are certainly others who come in with a completely emerging portfolio, and you need to build timelines in around that. So we would suggest that the metrics for the first 3 years in particular need to be very specific.
And to echo a little bit of what Suzanne said, again, it must be tied to the quality, readiness of the prospect pool, the maturity of the professional who is assigned to that pool, and in some cases, the readiness of the institution to articulate effective giving opportunities that will be attractive to their potential donors, or for which there is a highly compelling case for funding. So, and one last tactical approach you might employ is, what is the current base, what is the current ROI, expenses related to an individual staff member as compared to money attributed to that individual's work the prior year, and establish a growth plan so that we're going to take over a period of 3 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years, what seems reasonable, and try to build that, working with that staff member, the prospect pool, and then the partner, again, whether it be a curator, a faculty member, or a president, and continuing to work with that individual. Oh boy. Prospect research. I'm sorry, we're reading this on a tiny little screen here.
So the question was about ROI for prospect research
to executive management.
To executive management.
Well, you know, it goes to the question of how are we using, or how do we define the role of prospect research in our programs? When I got started in the business, it was typically a team of people who gathered information about individuals, put them into a report, and distributed those to the fundraisers. I think the tools we have available to us today offer interesting new ways to evaluate impact, and I'm really talking about analytics and our ability to use lots and lots of data points that we didn't have available to us really even 10 years ago. And how are we using all of that data in such a way that informs both the strategy and the and the results. So I think we're talking about, again, an analytics approach that is employed by researchers whose jobs really have changed over time.
So one of the things that we just did with a prospect research team, and it's not, you're right, it's not as clear cut. It's not like, if you invest in this, you're going to raise this much more money. But we do think it's important, as Lori said, to be able to show some of the analytics around this. So for instance, we just did with a client with a pool of seasoned major gifts officers who've been with the institution a long time, we work with their prospect research team to come up with, to analyze the ratings, the value, donor indicators, wealth indicators for the donors who were assigned versus those who were not. The prospect research team was able to identify a group of people who had great capacity and in every other way looked like major donors to the institution but were unassigned. And then we, on top of that, looked at the donor assignments and realized that there were a pretty high percentage of people who were assigned but really didn't have a lot of potential for major gifts over the long haul for this institution. So we were able to, show that to the major gifts officers, move people out of their pools, and move some new people in. And that was really being able to show value for the prospect research team. So I think using analytics in ways like that can really help you.
We have a question here about what type of metrics should the annual giving team, direct marketing, and volunteers consider to help build the major gift pipeline? I think you can, at the most fundamental levels, we would recommend that you build into your performance metrics the number of referrals, and then take it perhaps even a step further, that the number of referrals to the major gift program that actually become qualified prospects. So your annual giving team, particularly volunteers and those who may be out on the street soliciting leadership annual gifts, are in a great place to qualify or at least identify suspects in terms of wealth and capacity. It's a high volume part of your program, but that also combines the personal touch in terms of sitting down across the table from a donor or a prospect and being able to gather information in an appropriate way that may suggest greater capacity and interest. And, in terms of direct response, obviously anybody who first time ever writes a $100, $250, or $500 check should be evaluated. So again, having the systems and the metrics in place to filter out those donors whose behaviors may indicate greater interest, hopefully with greater capacity.
And of course, repeat donors. That is a pattern of giving is one of the metrics that you should look for, and certainly additional evaluation of those folks. We got a question here about the most effective communication source for young donors. That is that's a $64,000.
It
is. And one of the things that's interesting is we actually just convened a group of clients in the independent school sector, and we're having a conversation around this. And certainly the importance of social media was discussed. But one of the things that they found, the places that have been more successful, I think, in engaging young alumni as donors, is that they didn't default to one type of communication, that just like any other donor, there needs to be multiple channels. Don't assume that just because they're reading their, your Twitter feed means that it's actually going to result in a greater level of giving. You do have to do the same tried and true things. Peer-to-peer ask is still helping. You need to be direct in your asking. Those are important tools for communication, but they're not the only thing. Sorry, we're reading this as we go.
So we have a question about a non-academic institution and the best ways to build momentum around potentially a $100 million centennial campaign, and how you attract or create opportunities to attract $5 to $10 million prospective donors.
Yeah. So interestingly, and we see this certainly with our arts and culture clients, independent schools, some of those sort of non-higher ed, that often giving is driven by low-level participation and board giving. So this is a very common question that we get from our clients outside of large universities. How do we build that sort of middle of the triangle. And there are, a few pretty basic answers to that. Make sure you have very strong staff that are focused on those key areas. Make sure that you have a clear story, again, of why their gift matters. Often you will, you'll see in these places that there's one sort of mega gift for a museum, and then people think, why should I be giving $1 million? Does that really matter to this institution? So I think your need to tell a clear and compelling story is even greater. With this $100 million campaign idea, I actually haven't worked with any institution that has used that as a centennial marketing ploy. Have you, Laura?
Actually, I have currently am working with a client that is using their 125th as part of the campaign communications and engagement strategy. And it's an institution that's somewhat unique. It is a higher ed institution, but it's not a traditional 4-year undergraduate institution. And they have used it as an excuse to rally and engage with people that have not been engaged with them for a long time. It's a high-profile institution in a large metropolitan area that is driven by, very candidly, by events, high-profile, high-yield events. They launched their 125th anniversary a year prior and used the campaign kickoff as the culmination of the celebration, and they saw some success. They were able to engage with some of the heirs of the founding individuals of the institution, again, high-profile names that most of you all of you would recognize. And it has helped to at least engage at a lower level, because the campaign kickoff was a fundraiser for scholarships. So they were selling tables and used their connections to sell many of those tables. So it's not a lot of groundbreaking strategies, but it has been working for them pretty well.
I think one of the cautionary things that I would point out, though, is if you create very strong giving levels tied to a certain number, you are pushing perhaps some donors to higher giving, but you're also creating a floor for others. So if you're using 100, for instance, and I've seen institutions do this, there may be lots of giving at the $100,000 level, but are you actually leaving money on the table, because some of those prospects are actually $250,000 prospects, but you've done so much to market that $100,000 level that's where they see themselves. So I think a more nuanced gift table is always a good idea. Perhaps you could use that to drive your very top gift. Okay. I hope this has been helpful to you today. Suzanne and I both enjoyed it. And I think shortly you're going to be asked to participate in a little survey. Please, if you have additional follow-up questions, please submit them, and we will try to respond. But thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it.